Elias had always known that duty came first. But sometimes, in the quiet moments of a soldier's life, the heart refused to listen to reason. He had always been a man of action, trained to fight, to survive, and to protect. But what could a man like him do when the person he admired most was not just anyone? She was a princess of a world far different from his own. The alien planet of Zorath was beautiful, but it wasn't home. Its skies were a shade of purple that humans had never seen before, and its cities were made of crystalline structures that seemed to shimmer in the light of 3 suns. Yet the thing that always caught Elias's attention was the alien princess who ruled over this strange land. Lyra was not like other Zorathians. She was regal, with long silver hair that flowed like liquid, light and eyes that shifted colors depending on her emotions, deep green when she was calm, glowing gold when she was angry. She had the grace of a dancer and the strength of a warrior. From the moment Elias first saw her, he was captivated. But what was a human soldier supposed to do when faced with someone as powerful as a princess from another world? Elias didn't know. For years he had kept his distance, knowing his place in the grand scheme of things. He was just a soldier, someone who followed orders, fought wars, and never expected anything more than that. Yet with every passing day, his admiration for her grew. He had been assigned to Zorath as part of the peacekeeping force between humans and Zorathians. The mission was simple: ensure peace, manage the fragile alliance, and keep things from falling apart. The problem was that every time he saw Lyra, his heart raced. She was a symbol of everything that was beautiful, noble, and foreign. And Elias couldn't help but admire her. The first time they spoke was during a diplomatic meeting. Elias had been assigned to stand guard while the leaders of both factions discussed a critical treaty. As she entered the room, Elias couldn't help but stare. Her presence was commanding, yet there was an underlying sadness in her eyes. Despite the cheers and praises of her people, Lyra never seemed fully at ease. "Elias," the commander had called to him, snapping him out of his reverie. "Keep your focus." But it was impossible. For the first time, Elias saw more than just the princess. He saw the loneliness behind her regal exterior. In that moment, he understood why his heart ached every time he saw her. She was just like him, trapped by expectations, forced to play a role she never asked for. Days turned into weeks, and Elias continued his duties. He was there to protect her when the situation became tense, standing in the background during negotiations, always watching, always keeping his distance. He noticed things: the way her eyes flickered with uncertainty during speeches, how she would often retreat into her chambers after a long day, and how the weight of her crown seemed to pull at her shoulders. It was on one such day, during a quiet evening after a particularly difficult meeting, that Elias found himself in a position he had never anticipated. He had been walking down the palace halls, his boots echoing against the marble floor, when he saw her. Lyra was standing by the balcony, looking out over the city, the 3 suns setting in the distance. She looked so beautiful, so distant, yet so human. He hesitated. A part of him wanted to turn and walk away, to continue his life as a soldier. But another part, the part that had been quietly yearning for years, knew that this moment was his only chance. Taking a deep breath, Elias stepped forward. "Princess Lyra," he said, his voice steady but betraying the nervousness he felt. She didn't turn at first, but when she did, there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. "Elias," she replied, her voice soft, as if she had been expecting him. "Is something wrong?" Elias swallowed, trying to find the words. This wasn't part of his training. He wasn't supposed to confess feelings. He was supposed to keep his emotions hidden behind the uniform, to be a protector, not a lover. But now, standing before her, all of his resolve seemed to crumble. I have something to say, he began, his heart pounding in his chest. Something I should have said a long time ago. Lyra raised an eyebrow, her gaze still holding him in that gentle yet firm manner. What is it, Elias? For a moment he hesitated. The weight of his words felt like it could change everything. But he couldn't hold it in any longer. The truth had been building inside him for years, and now there was no way to stop it. I have loved you for years, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air between them, so simple, yet so powerful. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Lyra blinked, as if surprised by his sudden confession. She didn't look away, though. She didn't laugh or recoil in disbelief. Instead, she simply regarded him with an expression that Elias couldn't quite read. You've loved me? She asked, her voice soft but steady. There was no mockery in her tone, only curiosity, perhaps even a hint of something else. Elias nodded, unsure of what to say next. I know it's foolish, but it's the truth. Every day, I've watched you, admired you from afar, but I've never had the courage to speak it aloud. The princess didn't speak immediately. Instead, she took a slow step toward him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand his words. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the silence between them thick and heavy. Finally, Lyra spoke, but her words shocked Elias to his core. I know, she said quietly. Elias blinked, unable to believe what he was hearing. What? Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time she let down her guard just a little. I've known for a long time, Elias. Your feelings, they've never been hidden from me. In fact, I've sensed them even when you tried to hide them. Elias felt a rush of emotions, relief, confusion, and a touch of disbelief. But why didn't you say anything? She smiled gently, though it was tinged with sadness. Because I couldn't. I didn't know what to say to you. My duty is not mine alone and my heart. She paused, her eyes reflecting the complexity of her thoughts. My heart is not something I can simply give away. Not yet. Elias didn't understand, but he could see the conflict in her eyes. Lyra was caught between the weight of duty and the pull of something deeper, something that she didn't seem ready to acknowledge. I'm sorry, he said, his voice softening. I didn't mean to put you in a difficult position. I couldn't keep it in any longer. Lyra reached out, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture that felt more intimate than words. No need to apologize, Elias. Your feelings are not a burden, but there are things much bigger than the both of us. Things I am bound to. She looked out over the city, her expression distant once again. There are obligations I cannot escape. Elias nodded, though the ache in his chest grew stronger. I understand, he said quietly, though deep down, he wasn't sure if he truly did. How could he? He had just confessed his love to a princess, and all she had given him in return was the painful truth that she couldn't return it. Not yet, anyway. But even in that moment of despair, Elias felt something else. Hope. If she knew his feelings, if she understood the depths of his love, then perhaps, just perhaps, there was a future where things could be different, where they could be together. For now, though, all he could do was wait. The days following his confession were a blur for Elias. The words "I know" echoed in his mind, replaying over and over. It wasn't what he had expected. He had anticipated some form of rejection, maybe even ridicule. But instead, Lyra's calm acceptance had left him feeling more confused than ever. Elias had always been good at reading situations, understanding people, even predicting what might happen next. But with Lyra, he felt lost. He had confessed his feelings, and she hadn't rejected him. In fact, she had admitted that she knew. that she had known for some time. And yet, despite this revelation, she hadn't taken a step toward him. She hadn't given him any sign of hope. The distance between them, which had once felt natural, now seemed unbearable. As the days passed, Elias continued his duties, keeping his distance from Lyra as he had done for years. He watched her from afar, during the council meetings, the peaceful demonstrations, and the quiet moments between the battles of diplomacy. She seemed as composed and regal as ever, but Elias noticed the subtle change in her eyes. There was a hint of something that wasn't there before. It was a week after his confession when he finally saw her again. It was late after, a long day of negotiations. The stars were just beginning to twinkle in the purple sky, and the palace seemed unusually quiet. Elias stood at his post outside her chambers, the weight of his thoughts dragging him down. His mind kept racing back to her words. I know, but what did that mean? What did she really feel? The sound of footsteps approached, soft but unmistakable. He straightened, his heart leaping in his chest. He turned to see Lyra walking toward him, her silver hair flowing like a river of light in the moonlight. Elias, she said softly, stopping just in front of him. Princess, Elias replied, his voice caught in his throat. He had been expecting this moment, but now that it was here, he didn't know what to say. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. You've been distant since the other night, she remarked. Her tone wasn't cold, but there was a tinge of concern in it. Is something wrong? Elias hesitated. I didn't mean to be distant, he said quietly. I don't know what to do now. After what I said to you, he looked away, feeling the weight of his emotions pressing on him. I thought you'd reject me, Princess. But instead, you said you knew. Lyra's gaze softened and she took a step closer to him. Her presence was as powerful as ever, but there was a gentleness in her now that Elias hadn't noticed before. Elias, she said, her voice low and comforting, I didn't reject you. I simply didn't know how to respond. Elias raised an eyebrow. But why not? If you knew, why didn't you say something sooner? She sighed, her eyes flickering, with a sadness Elias hadn't seen before. It's not that simple, she replied. You're a soldier, Elias, and I am a princess. There are things I cannot ignore, things that bind me to this world, to my people. I cannot simply follow my heart when the consequences are so great. Elias's heart sank. He had expected a rejection of some sort, but this was different. This was about duty, about responsibility. He had known in the back of his mind that their love was never going to be easy, but hearing it from her lips made it all the more real. But you said you felt the same, Elias said, his voice breaking slightly. Does that mean nothing? After everything we've been through together, after all the times I've stood by your side, fought for your people, can't you see what this could be? Lyra was silent for a moment, her gaze shifting to the stars above. I see it, Elias. I see it more than you know. But what you don't understand is that I am not free to choose my path, not like you are. Elias clenched his fists, frustration welling up inside him. But I am free. I'm just a soldier, Lyra. I have nothing to lose. You, on the other hand, are a princess. You're bound by your title, by your people, by a duty that has been passed down through generations. But that doesn't mean we can't be together. Lyra's eyes softened as she met his gaze again. You don't understand. It's not just about duty, Elias. It's about the future of my people. If I follow my heart and leave my duty behind, it will affect everything. I am not just one person. I am the future of Zorath, and that future cannot be decided by the whims of my heart. Elias felt his heart break at her words. He had always known, deep down, that there were things beyond their control, things far larger than themselves. But hearing her speak with such certainty made him realize just how small he was in the grand scheme of things. I didn't mean to make things harder for you, Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. Lyra stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder, the gesture tender yet filled with unspoken emotion. You didn't make things harder, Elias. You just made them clearer. For both of us. There was a long silence between them, the weight of their unspoken words hanging in the air. Elias wanted to say more, to convince her that they could make it work. But he knew deep down that Lyra's duty was something he couldn't change. She was a princess, and her heart wasn't truly hers to give. I wish things could be different, Lyra said softly, her voice tinged with regret. But they aren't. And for now we must live with that. Elias nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He had hoped that confessing his love would change things, would somehow make her see him in a new light. But the reality was far more complicated. Her duty, her people. These were things he could never fully understand. I understand, Elias replied quietly. I wish you didn't have to bear all of this on your own. Lyra smiled faintly, her eyes filled with both sorrow and understanding. You don't have to carry it alone, Elias. Just because we cannot be together in the way we wish does not mean our bond is meaningless. I will always value you. I will always remember you. Elias felt the weight of her words, though they brought him little comfort. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But at least she knew. At least he knew. As Lyra turned to walk away, Elias remained standing there, staring at the stars above. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly alone. His love for Lyra was real, but in the world they lived in, that was all it could ever be. Just love, without the chance of becoming something more. The days after their conversation were a whirlwind for Elias. His thoughts remained consumed by Lyra, by her words, by the deep, undeniable connection they shared. Though she had said they couldn't be together, something inside him still refused to let go of the hope that maybe, just maybe, their bond wasn't as impossible as she had made it seem. Elias kept his distance, as she had suggested, but each passing day felt more like a trial. The quiet moments in between his duties, the hours he spent alone in his quarters or walking the palace halls, became unbearable. His heart still longed for Lyra, and despite her insistence that they could not be together, he couldn't silence the part of him that believed in the possibility of a different future. It was during a particularly tense diplomatic meeting that Elias saw her again. The conference room was large, filled with leaders from both human and Zorathian factions. The treaty talks were at a breaking point, with tensions running high. The humans wanted more resources from the planet, and the Zorathians were reluctant to give up any more of their land. As the voices of the council rose, Elias found himself standing just outside the room, on guard as always. But even though he was supposed to focus on his duties, his eyes kept drifting to her. Lyra sat at the head of the Zorathian delegation, her posture regal and confident. Her eyes, however, were filled with something different. Elias could see it, the same sadness he had noticed during their private conversations, the burden of responsibility pressing down on her. He knew it was wrong to feel this way, to still hope for something he couldn't have. But when he saw her like that, vulnerable yet so strong, he couldn't help himself. He felt the need to reach out, to stand by her side. After the meeting ended, Lyra left the chamber, her face a mask of composure. Elias hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. Without thinking, he stepped forward, moving toward her. "Princess," he called, his voice low but firm. She stopped, her eyes catching his. Her expression softened when she saw him approach. "Elias," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you were on duty." "I was," he replied, "but I couldn't help myself. I needed to talk to you." Lyra looked around, ensuring no one was close enough to overhear. With a small nod, she led him toward a quieter part of the palace, a secluded garden hidden from the eyes of the others. The path was overgrown with vines and flowers, the air thick with the scent of alien blooms. It was a place where she often retreated when she needed to think, away from the prying eyes of her people and the weight of her responsibilities. They sat on a stone bench, the silence between them heavy and thick. Elias could feel the distance between them, the invisible wall that had been built after their last conversation. It seemed impossible to break, but he was determined to try. "Lyra," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "I know you said we can't be together. I know you have a duty, a responsibility, but I can't just turn off my feelings for you. I can't pretend that I don't care, that I don't want to be with you." She looked at him, her expression softening. "I understand, Elias. I really do. But you have to understand. I can't just throw away everything I've been taught, everything I've been raised to believe. My people depend on me. My decisions will affect not just Zorath, but the entire galaxy. I don't want you to throw anything away," Elias said, his voice low and earnest. "I just want a chance to prove that we can make this work, that our love is worth fighting for." Lyra looked away for a moment, her eyes tracing the darkening sky above them. "What if it isn't enough, Elias? What if our love isn't enough to bridge the gap between our worlds? I have to think about the future of Zorath. What happens if I follow my heart and everything falls apart? What happens to my people?" Elias's heart sank, but he refused to back down. "But what about you, Lyra? What about your happiness? If you don't take a chance on this, on us, then what kind of life are you really living? You're trapped by duty, by expectations. You deserve more than that." For a long moment, Lyra was silent. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, Elias saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, a loud crackle of static interrupted their quiet conversation. "Princess Lyra," came the urgent voice from a communication device strapped to her wrist. She quickly turned, her face transforming back into the mask of the princess. The moment had passed, and Elias knew it. "I have to go," Lyra said, standing quickly. "There's an emergency at the northern border. The humans are advancing, and we need to address it immediately." Elias stood as well, a deep frustration welling up inside him. "Lyra, wait!" "I can't, Elias," she interrupted, her voice firm. "Duty calls. I wish things were different. I wish we could have what we both want. But we don't live in a world of wishes. We live in a world of responsibility. Before Elias could say another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the garden. He watched her leave, feeling like the very ground beneath him had shifted. The weight of her words crushed him, but he couldn't let it go. As the days went by, the tension between the two of them only grew. Lyra continued to fulfill her duties as princess, leading her people with a grace and determination that only deepened Elias's admiration for her. But every time he saw her, every time they spoke, he felt the same pull toward her, the same connection that seemed impossible to ignore. One evening, after another grueling day of negotiations, Elias found himself alone in the training grounds. He had spent hours honing his skills, trying to push away the emotions that were becoming impossible to manage. His sword felt heavier in his hand, his mind clouded by thoughts of Lyra. He swung his blade against the air, his movements sharp and controlled. But despite the physical exertion, his mind kept returning to her. The more he tried to block her out, the more intense his feelings became. He couldn't understand it. He couldn't explain it. But what he did know was that he couldn't give up on her. Not yet. Suddenly, he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned quickly, his hand instinctively gripping his sword. But when he saw who it was, he lowered his weapon. Lyra stood there, her expression unreadable. "Elias," she said softly, her voice carrying a hint of something he hadn't heard before. A trace of vulnerability. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said." Elias felt his heart skip a beat. "Lyra." She walked toward him, stopping just a few paces away. "I've been thinking about it too, about us. I know it's not simple, but I can't just walk away from how I feel." Elias's chest tightened with hope. "What are you saying?" Lyra took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "I'm saying that maybe we can find a way to make this work. It won't be easy, but we can try." Elias couldn't believe what he was hearing. For the first time, Lyra was offering him something, a chance. He stepped forward, reaching for her hand. "Are you sure?" She nodded slowly. "I'm not promising that everything will be perfect, but I'm willing to try. We owe it to ourselves to see what's possible." Elias's heart soared. After everything they had been through, after all the obstacles in their way, there was finally a chance to make their love more than just a dream. They stood there in the quiet of the training grounds, hand in hand, knowing that their future would not be easy, but for the first time in a long time, they felt like they might be able to overcome anything together. The peace talks had been going on for weeks. Human and Zorathian leaders gathered around tables, hoping to hammer out an agreement that would keep the fragile alliance intact. But Elias knew deep down that peace was always temporary. The tension between the two sides was like a tightly wound spring just waiting to snap. He had been working alongside Lyra for months, ensuring that her safety came first. But every day, their bond grew stronger. She had begun to trust him more, to confide in him when the weight of her responsibilities became too heavy to bear alone. And Elias, he had never stopped loving her, even when she had pushed him away. But now, something had shifted. They had agreed to fight for each other, to try and find a way to make their love work. The night of the attack, the stars shone brightly over the palace, casting long shadows across the courtyard. Elias stood at his post, as he had done countless times before, watching over the princess's quarters. He was tired, his mind constantly battling the thoughts of Lyra and the future they couldn't yet see clearly. But tonight was different. Something felt off. He had heard the murmurs, the increasing number of clashes between human and Zorathian forces at the borders. The fighting had escalated, and despite their best efforts, there seemed to be no stopping it. The negotiations were a failure, and war was now inevitable. Suddenly, the calm of the night was shattered by an explosion that rocked the entire palace. Elias instinctively reached for his weapon and ran toward the source of the blast, his heart racing. The palace was under attack. As he ran through the halls, he found Lyra standing in front of the war room, her face pale, her eyes wide with shock. Soldiers rushed past, their weapons raised ready to defend the palace. But Lyra, she stood frozen, her thoughts far away. "Lyra!" Elias called, rushing to her side. "You need to go to the safe room now!" She looked at him, but there was something different in her eyes, something desperate. "Elias, I can't just run and hide. My people need me." Elias grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the safe room. "Lyra, we don't have time for this. They're already inside the palace. You'll be safer if you go now." For a moment, she hesitated, but then her expression hardened. "No, I won't. Hide while my people are dying. You said we'd fight together. This is our fight, Elias." He stared at her, his heart torn. She was right. She couldn't just run. She wasn't like the others. Her people needed her. And despite the danger, Elias couldn't leave her side either. "Then let's fight together," he said, his voice firm. The sound of battle grew louder as they made their way toward the front lines. Zorathian soldiers clashed with the human forces, their weapons lighting up the night sky. Elias and Lyra ran toward the heart of the conflict, their adrenaline fueling them. The battlefield was chaos. Explosions rocked the ground beneath their feet, and the cries of the wounded filled the air. Elias kept close to Lyra, watching her every move. She was fierce, her blade flashing through the air as she cut down enemy soldiers, her mind focused on the task at hand. But Elias could see the toll it was taking on her. Her movements were becoming slower, more deliberate, and her breath came in ragged gasps. "Lyra!" he called, grabbing her arm. "You need to rest. Let us handle this." "No," she said, her voice cold but determined. "I won't stop, not until the enemy retreats." Elias watched her, torn between his desire to protect her and the reality of the war around them. The alliance between their people was falling apart before their eyes, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. But one thing was clear. They couldn't let each other go, not even now. They fought side by side, pushing forward, knowing that if they didn't hold the line, their world would be torn apart. The battle raged on, and as the hours passed, Elias began to see something more than just the destruction around them. He saw the future slipping away piece by piece. But it wasn't over yet. Lyra wasn't ready to give up. Neither was he. Eventually, the tide of the battle began to shift. The human forces, though numerous, were no match for the fierce determination of the Zorathian soldiers. Lyra fought with a fire that Elias had never seen before. She was unstoppable, and her courage was infectious. Elias fought harder, faster, as if their bond gave him strength. Finally, the battle began to slow. The enemy forces retreated, leaving the Zorathians victorious, at least for now. The battlefield was littered with the fallen, and the air was thick with smoke and blood. Elias stood beside Lyra, both of them panting, covered in dirt and sweat. She turned to him, her eyes wild with the adrenaline of the battle. "We won," she said, her voice strained. Elias looked at her, his heart racing not just from the battle, but from the intense connection between them. They had survived the worst of it, together. But what would come next? "Is this really what we want, Lyra?" Elias asked, his voice soft but serious. "I'm here with you, always. But can we keep doing this, fighting, living this way while everything around us falls apart?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached out, placing a hand on his cheek, her fingers cold against his skin. "I don't know, Elias," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the battlefield. "But I know I can't do this without you." Elias closed his eyes for a moment, taking in her words, feeling the weight of the decision they had to make. They were fighting for a future that seemed uncertain, a future that was slipping further away with each passing day. But they couldn't let go of each other. Not now. Not when they were so close to something more. As the sounds of battle began to quiet, Lyra pulled away, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "We've won this battle. But the war isn't over. We need to go, back to the palace, to prepare for what comes next." Elias nodded. "You're right. The war isn't over, but we'll face it together. Whatever happens, we'll face it side by side." They walked back toward the palace, their hands brushing together, both of them lost in the weight of the moment. The battle may have been won, but the real war, won between their hearts, their duty, and the future they both wanted, was just beginning. The war had left its mark on both Elias and Lyra. The streets of the palace were lined with banners, torn and stained from the battles fought, the air thick with the scent of smoke and the echo of distant gunfire. Despite the victory they had won, the conflict had only deepened the wounds between the two sides, and the future was uncertain. Elias knew that no victory, no matter how hard won, could erase the damage done. Yet, in the midst of all the chaos, something had changed between him and Lyra. The bond they had shared, once fragile and distant, had grown stronger. They had fought, side by side, survived together in the face of overwhelming odds. For the first time in a long time, Elias felt a sense of hope, even in the midst of all the destruction. But now they were faced with the difficult question of what came next. War was never easy, and peace was never permanent. The alliance between humans and Zorathians was on the verge of collapse, and the negotiations had barely begun. Both sides were wary, unsure if the fragile peace could hold after the bloodshed that had occurred. The two of them stood on the balcony of the palace, overlooking the city. The suns were setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. Lyra stood next to Elias, her gaze distant as she looked out over the horizon. "We've come so far," Lyra said softly, her voice carrying a weight that was almost too much to bear. "But there's so much more left to do." Elias turned, to her his heart heavy with the uncertainty of it all. "I know. We can't undo the damage, but maybe we can build something new. Together." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "I want that too, Elias, more than anything, but I'm not sure it's possible. The future of Zorath, the future of my people, it's all in the balance. I can't ignore my duty, my responsibilities are too great." Elias reached out, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to do it alone. You never have to do it alone. We've proven that we can fight together, Lyra. We can face whatever comes next, no matter how hard it is. If we want peace, we have to fight for it. Both of us." She squeezed his hand gently, her gaze softening. "And what about the war? What about the future of our people? How can we change something that's been like this for so long?" Elias's heart pounded in his chest as he faced the truth of her words. The war had torn them both apart, pushing them to the brink. But in the midst of all that chaos, he had come to understand something important. Love, true love, was worth fighting for. And it was time for them to fight, for each other, for the future, for everything they had dreamed of. "I believe we can make a difference," Elias said firmly. "We can show them that love doesn't have to be a weakness, that it can be a strength. We can bring people together, but it's going to take time. It's going to take sacrifice, and we both have to be ready for that." Lyra nodded slowly, her eyes searching his face as if weighing the sincerity of his words. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of their shared understanding hanging between them. "You're right," she finally said. "We've already lost so much. If we don't try now, we risk losing everything. If we can prove that there's a way for both our people to coexist, maybe we can change the future, together." Elias smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The scars of war ran deep, and the wounds between their two worlds might never fully heal. But in that moment, standing on the balcony with Lyra, he knew that they had a chance. A real chance to build something better. "We'll do it together," he promised. The following days were filled with long hours of meetings, strategy sessions, and negotiations. The palace, once filled with the sounds of battle, was now a place of diplomacy. The leaders of both the human and Zorathian factions gathered, each side still wary but willing to listen. Lyra stood at the forefront, her confidence unwavering as she addressed the leaders of both sides. Elias was by her side, offering her support, standing as her protector and her ally. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, moments where the old animosities flared up. But the more they worked together, the more they fought for peace, the more their bond grew stronger. Lyra had never been so determined. She had always known the weight of her title, the responsibility of leading her people. But now, with Elias by her side, she felt as though the future was hers to shape. For the first time, She didn't feel alone in her fight. And Elias, too, had changed. He had spent so many years fighting wars, never questioning the reasons behind them. But now, standing beside Lyra, he realized that there was more to life than just surviving. There was more to fighting than just victory. There was hope. There was love. And with Lyra, he felt as though they could accomplish anything. As the peace talks progressed, their efforts began to pay off. Small victories turned into bigger ones. Slowly, the tensions between humans and Zorathians began to ease. The leaders of both sides began to see that cooperation, rather than conflict, was the key to a future that didn't just survive, but thrived. One evening, after a particularly successful round of negotiations, Lyra and Elias found themselves in the palace garden once more. The air was cool, the stars bright above them. It was peaceful here, away from the demands of their duties, just the two of them. Elias looked at Lyra, his heart full of gratitude. "We've come a long way." Lyra smiled, the weight of her responsibilities still present in her eyes, but softened by the hope of what they had accomplished. "Yes, we have. But we're not done yet." "No," Elias agreed. "But we're on the right path, and that's all that matters." They stood together side by side, knowing that their journey wasn't over. The road ahead would still be difficult, filled with challenges and obstacles. But they had each other. They had their love, and for the first time, they had hope. The future was uncertain, yes, but with each other they knew they could face whatever came next. Together, they could build a new world, a world where love, peace, and unity were possible, no matter how hard the fight.